So, Catching Cold is written by an author named Neal Shusterman. Neal Shusterman has written wonderful speculative fiction novels, stories that really kind of stretch the boundaries of your imagination. So, if you remember from First Chapter Friday, the chapter from the book Full Tilt, which was about the two brothers at the amusement park, and the one brother tries to go rescue his hat by climbing the side of a roller coaster and narrowly gets saved by his other brother. That's definitely Neal Shusterman. That's his writing style. A lot of action. He takes typical situations and twists them in a way that we normally don't think of. So if you take a look at our picture on the front, we've got an ice cream truck, which is just about as ordinary an American situation as you can have. I think everybody has had the experience of buying ice cream from the ice cream man. Whether you were, 2 years old or, it just happened last summer, everybody has a memory of that circumstance. And Neal Shusterman knows that. So we'll see how he twists it and changes it and makes it just a little bit strange and a whole lot speculative. So we start with an illusion. History tells of a man named Pavlov. Pavlov was a scientist who did a famous experiment with dogs. Each day, he would ring a bell, then feed the dogs, ring a bell, then feed the dogs, over and over, until the dogs knew the bell meant food. Then, one day, he just rang the bell. The dogs, who were trained to expect the food after the bell, all began to salivate, drooling all over themselves, expecting food that didn't come. They developed a psychological response to the sound of the bell. It's called classical conditioning. So I'm going to pause here to point out that this is actually 100% factually accurate. Pavlov really was a scientist who existed. He did experiment on dogs, and he did create this term called classical conditioning, meaning that you could train somebody to react one way based on a completely unrelated stimulus. So generally speaking, you don't have to hear a bell to eat. But classical conditioning means that those dogs had a reaction because they experienced the food being tied to the sound of the bell over and over and over again. So this is a perfect example of an illusion. Now, just like the video told us, you're not always going to understand every illusion. And if you've never heard of Pavlov and you've never heard of his experiments with dogs, you can actually go look this up online right now and find out more information about it. The use of illusion means that the author is going to try to get us to understand something deeper. So we've got to keep Pavlov in mind as we continue reading. The same can often be said of kids when they hear a certain sound wafting over the treetops in their neighborhood. A pleasant sound, a song. The song is different in every neighborhood and in every town across the nation, but the song always means the same thing. Are you listening? Can you hear it now? The music is out there, stealing through your window, echoing between closely packed rows of homes. It seems to come from the left, then from the right. It grows louder and then it fades, louder and fades, until you're not sure whether the song is coming or going. And, like Pavlov's dogs, you're drooling. You're scrambling for spare change, begging your parents for $1, because $1 is all it costs to pay the ice cream man. Just $1, and you can have sherbet on a stick in the shape of your favorite cartoon character with a gumball nose. Hurry out that door! The ice cream man is here! So at this point, it's worth noting that if we didn't get the illusion that started the story, we wouldn't understand this comparison. That when we hear the ice cream man, we do get excited. We do start to get hungry for ice cream. In this case, you might even drool. But that illusion was put in place to show us that, in a weird way, we, have been classically conditioned. We have been taught to tie in a noise to something to eat. So that's kind of interesting, isn't it? Let's continue. Like you, Marty Zybeck was a victim of classical conditioning. However, no one had it worse than Marty. He kept his window open every afternoon when the weather got warm and kept his sizable ears tuned to that high frequency on which the tune would come. His particular ice cream truck played Pop Goes the Weasel. It was one of the more annoying ice cream truck tunes, but for Marty, it was a call to arms. Whenever he heard it, Marty was prepared. He already had $1 in his pocket to give to the creamy cold ice cream man. The moment he heard the song, he would bound down the stairs and burst out the front door. His ears, like radar dishes, would triangulate the direction of the music, and he would take off, his feet pounding heavily, desperately on the pavement. But each day, the result was exactly the same. First, he would hear the music in front of him. Then, he would hear it passing on another street behind the row of houses to his left. He would run until he was out of breath and practically out of his mind, but the end result was always the same. The music would fade. The creamy cold truck would leave, and he'd be left panting in the street with $1 and no ice cream. If only I were a little faster, he would think. But speed was not one of Marty's strong points. He came last in everything. He was, in fact, the very definition of last. Not only was his the last name on any school roster, but he was also the last to finish every race, the last to turn in every test, the last to be done with dinner, and the last kid on the school bus. It only seems to follow that no matter how much he tried to get the creamy cold truck, he would be the last kid in the neighborhood out the door. "He's an impatient one, that ice cream man," his mother would say. "Never hangs around long." And then she'd remind Marty that maybe it was best he didn't have the ice cream anyway, as he tended toward being a husky child. "Well, it's not a total loss. All that running will do you good." He would sneer at his mother when she said things like that. His mother was as slender as could be, but Marty took after his father, who was not. "I'll bet his ice cream stinks," Marty would grumble. But deep down, he didn't believe it. In his heart of hearts, he believed the creamy cold ice cream was the tastiest, most heavenly frozen treat ever devised by man. And the only way to get it was to buy it from the truck. Marty Zybeck didn't have many goals in life, but at the top of that short list was catching the creamy cold man. So before we go into the next section of the story, it's going to be worth us taking a look back at the information we've been given in this part of the story. So when we think about our plot map and the information we're usually given in the beginning of a story, we usually get our protagonist. And as we can tell, our protagonist is Marty Zybeck, okay? As we get further into the story, the author describes Marty a little bit more, so we understand what kind of person Marty is, what his personality is like, okay? So it seems to us that Marty is, according to the text, last. He's slow to get to the creamy cold truck, in part because he's slow to do everything. He's last to finish the race. He's last to turn in the test. He's the last one done with dinner. He's the last kid to make it to the school bus at the end of the day. And so it makes sense that he's the last kid in the neighborhood who gets out the door to see the creamy cold man, even though he does have that $1 in his pocket and that really strong desire to get that ice cream. Additionally, we get the conflict. So we've got our protagonist, we've got our setting, just so you know. We do have a setting here. We're in a typical suburban neighborhood, it seems. We are, in America, it seems. And our time period seems to be the modern day. So that's not stuff that the author has told us explicitly, but based on the situation, we can infer that much. So we've got most of our on-set information already done. But when we're looking for the conflict, our main problem that's going to move this entire story, it's given to us right here before the page break. Marty Zybeck wanted to catch that creamy cold man. He wanted that ice cream in the worst way possible. And that is the main conflict that's going to move this story forward. The next file will give you the next part of the story, so come on back.